I live in a house that was built in the 1700s. My sister believes it's haunted because it's so old, but I don't think so. Yet sometimes things happen that I don't immediately have an explanation for. The most bizarre thing that's happened to me so far is the following. I was in the kitchen and had just poured myself something to drink. I took my glass and left the kitchen through the doorway, leading into the hallway. The moment I stepped through the doorway, something flew over my head in the opposite direction. It flew very fast, so I never got a chance to get a really good look at it, but it looked like a big grey sheet or cloth. It also looked as if it hadn't flown out of the hallway, but rather dived from the ceiling above the doorway in the hallway into the kitchen. I ducked out of the way and said sorry, because I felt like I had to apologize for being in the way, and continued down the hallway. It was only at the end of the corridor that I suddenly realized that what had just happened was not normal. I stopped and thought, huh? What did I just dodge for? And who did I apologize to? I went back to the kitchen to see if anything had fallen on the floor. I found nothing. No sheets or clothes laying around. I checked whether a bird had flown in. That was not the case. I also examined the doorway and ceiling above, but nothing had broken or come loose. Finally, I reenacted the scene several times, pouring a glass of water and walking through the doorway to see if the same thing would happen. But no. I was home alone. It was the middle of the day and it was sunny outside, so I certainly wasn't affected by the darkness of the night or other grim weather conditions. The windows of this house are quite small, and there were no plants in front of them that could create shadows. The light in the hallway was also on. Moreover, it was certainly not a shadow. The thing seemed solid and had the grey colour of concrete. I personally think my brain was messing with me, but my sister is convinced it was a ghost. When I was about 6 in the early 90s, I lived with my family in a small Ohio town close to West Virginia. We lived in a Victorian house built in the mid to late 1800s, which had survived two major historical floods. Our house was also located right across the street from a funeral home, so seeing caskets and hearses and otherwise strange things was a normal part of my early childhood. On this particular night, I remember waking up from a dead sleep to full alertness. My brother Victor and I had a system. If scary stuff happened to one of us, we just jumped in bed with the other, no questions asked. Our parents didn't believe the things we saw and got furious with us for interrupting their sleep for nightmares and nonsense. So we learned early to rely on each other. That night, after doing a quick scan of the room, I decided that there was nothing scary here right now, and I couldn't remember any nightmares either. Basically shrugging it off, I lay my head back down and idly wondered what woke me. As soon as my head hit the pillow, before my eyes even closed, my father, in the living room on the other side of the wall next to my bed, and my sister, who was in an upstairs bedroom located directly above the living room, both began screaming and yelling. My father charged through the room with myself and my two brothers in it, turning on all the lights and carrying a loaded shotgun. He quickly checked our closet before yelling at me that there was a man in the house. Wake your brothers and hide, before dashing upstairs while my mom was comforting my sister. After turning on every light in the house and searching it several times, my father calmed down enough to tell my mom what happened. Having been singularly unable to wake the boys, despite all the lights, yelling, and me frantically shaking them, I crept into the hallway to eavesdrop on my parents. It wasn't hard to either. My father was amped and talking very loudly. He said that he had fallen asleep on the couch watching TV and was woken up some time later with an intense feeling of dread and being watched. He tried to sit up and look around, but could only move his head. Standing at his feet was a tall, inky black figure, which looked to be wearing a trench coat and fedora. My father fully believed this was a real man and said he was frozen in fear. He somehow lost sight of the man, even though the man didn't seem to move. My dad said it was almost like he just vanished. Classic sleep paralysis, right? Maybe. Or just maybe it wasn't what it seemed at first. After telling my mum what he experienced, she must have had quite the look on her face because he immediately began asking her what was wrong and why they were screaming upstairs. After all, The screaming started simultaneously. There was no time between for my sister to hear him and then scream. This was my mom's response. She said that while she was comforting Lacey, the sister, and reassuring her that her dad was making sure that there was no one who would come to hurt her, Lacey told my mom what made her scream. Lacey said she woke up with a terrible feeling of danger and like someone was watching her. She tried to sit up but could only move her head. At the foot of her bed was a tall, dark figure in a hat and long coat. She said she was too scared to move until the man just disappeared, and she then began screaming. So I know a lot of sleep paralysis experiences are not paranormal, but after living through this, I'm not so sure that all sleep paralysis experiences are just in our brains either. My father and sister were in different rooms and on separate floors, yet still managed to have the exact same experience at the exact same time. And whatever it was woke me up in the minutes that they must have been laying there paralyzed, only a few feet from me in my father's case, as only a thin wall separated where we both were sleeping. Plus, a 2 and a 4-year-old slept through a virtual Armageddon of screaming, lights, loaded weapons, and physical shaking to wake them. They never even twitched. Anyone with children knows this isn't standing operating procedure for such young ones. In addition, this was in the early 90s, pre-internet, and my parents were staunch disbelievers in anything paranormal. They had never heard of the Hat Man or shadow people at this point. In fact, I was the one to tell them about it many years later in my early 20s, when I ran into one myself and did a little research. So, what's the community's opinion on this? Was this totally explainable and I'm just missing an obvious explanation? Or do y'all believe that this was an actual supernatural event? I'm really curious to hear some outside theories, as I've wondered about this for years. I was a bartender at a pool hall on the outskirts of New Orleans for about 10 years. Our main patrons were older men who mostly lived alone. We were the spot they came to socialize. Many came for long hours every day, whether they played pool that particular day or not. Over the years, many of these men passed, a few even dying in the building. We had a few fatal heart attacks and a stroke victim who passed before the EMTs could get there. Sadly, this bar was the last place many of these men had felt happy and needed in their lives, which I think may have drawn some of them back after passing. Also, bars have long been rumored to be favorite hangouts for earthbound spirits who don't realize they're dead and are craving one more drink or smoke. Or possibly a game of pool in this case. There was definite activity in the bar and pool hall, though it was an on and off. A male voice would loudly say my name, directly in my ear with a blast of warm air, as if I had breath, when I was nowhere near any living person. At the beginning of my shift, the bar was usually empty, so I would go into the office to count the money in the gaming safe. I always kept the camera feeds up on the monitor, just in case someone came in. I can't tell you how many times I would look at the monitor and see someone sitting at the bar waiting for service, even though I hadn't heard the door chime. I'd head out to the bar, only for it to be empty. Most often, it was a really pale white guy with dark hair, white tee, and black jacket. One day, my first customer of the shift came in and sat in the seat that the pasty guy had been in on the camera feed about an hour or two before. I didn't say anything, not wanting to sound crazy. I was behind the bar and about 10 feet from the customer when he screamed like a little girl and jumped up so fast that he sent his chair flying backwards. He swore up and down that someone had grabbed his leg and squeezed. He said he could feel the individual fingers and everything. We were the only two people in the bar. He left immediately, still shaking. I saw people in my peripheral area that weren't there when I turned towards them. Many times I would be serving drinks and call out, "I'll be right with you as soon as I finish here," before turning to see no one. I thought it might just be me seeing things, but it literally never happened anywhere else except at work. And several times, customers remarked that they could have sworn they had seen someone who had just been standing there as well. To get behind the bar, you had to go to the end farthest from the entrance, where a section of the bar lifted up like a door. To the right was where the bartending happened, but to the left was a hallway that had the office and rooms with the safes, extra liquor bottles, etc. Basically, everything down that hallway had a lot of value, and the bartenders were expected to make sure that no one came behind the bar or gained access to the hallway. I always saw people walking back there, not from my peripheral either. These people looked very solid and real. I could easily describe their skin and hair color, outfits, the whole shebang. I would go running back there, check all three rooms down the hallway, and not find a soul, even though the only way out would have been to pass me. This happened all the time, whether I was slow or busy. It actually seemed to happen more when the bar was packed. My regulars were very familiar with this routine and teased me about it unmercifully. However, word of this did cause my coworkers to begin sharing their own experiences with me, so I was able to get some confirmation at least. The activity, which had always been intermittent, got really intense for almost 2 months. Then, everything stopped. For months. The guy who got his leg grabbed and a few other regulars who had witnessed some things commented on it, and so did my coworkers. No more chasing shadows or disappearing customers. It was great. A few months after the activity stopped at the bar, I'm taking a shower at home. Stand up shower, no tub. I noticed that the far right corner of my shadow seemed very dim. I peeked my head out to make sure none of our three bathroom bulbs had burned out. They were all shining away. I shrugged it off, even though I had a slightly unsettling feeling. It was nothing major. This continued for several weeks, although not every day, and the feeling of unease grew. It wasn't always dim over there, but when it was, I swear I could feel it before even looking. The shower is my happy place, and I hated this newfound creepiness invading it. I tried to think of every possible explanation: seasonal changing of the angle of sunlight, weather or cloud condition, my mental state, you name it. However, I had lived there for over 5 years at this point, and had never seen anything remotely like this. I have one tiny bathroom window with thickly frosted glass and a screen, so it's never really affected the lighting in the bathroom, and it's angled away from the shower. As time went on, the dimness grew more pronounced. It now looked like a diffuse, shadowy mist than a dim spot. The feeling of unease began to change too. I started feeling like something was watching me while I showered. I found myself refusing to close my eyes or turn around when showering, and seriously considered how long I could go for between showers before it became noticeable. I'd been trying to convince myself that it was all some kind of stress induced psychosomatic weird thing my brain was doing, or a strange type of vision anomaly. I was unsuccessful. I finally accepted that there was actually something there, watching me at my most vulnerable. Enough was enough. I contacted a friend and told him a little of what I'd felt, and expressed my desire to do a house cleansing. I didn't want to do it alone, and he agreed to come over in 2 days. Feeling better about the whole situation, I had a slightly smug air as I started my shower that night. And lo and behold, there was no darkness, no shadows, no weird feelings. Yes, maybe I had been tripping after all, so to speak. I'm under the water with my eyes closed, enjoying the hell out of my bright, peaceful shower, when a shock of alarm jolted through me. It felt like someone was standing right there in front of me and staring at me hard. When I opened my eyes, the shadow was there and looked different than before. It was much darker. There was a clearly visible oval or egg-shaped center of deeper darkness in the middle of the shadows, although I could still see through it. The top of it was slightly lower than my upper chest, just under 5 feet, and it didn't have hard edges, just kind of diffused out to light a shadow. The oval was roughly 3 feet from top to bottom, and about a foot and a half wide. I stood frozen, just staring at it for a few seconds. It was like my brain was having trouble processing what I was seeing. Then, my brain started working again, and I jumped out of the shower stark naked and half rinsed. Ran through the house, dripping shampoo and water everywhere, yelling, "What the fuck?" over and over. It's pretty freaking hilarious to picture now, but at the time I was scared shitless. I skipped my shower the next day. When my friend arrived the day after, I frantically filled him in on what had happened the night we agreed to do the cleansing, although I did leave out the parts out about running naked and yelling. He had this little smirk on his face, so I asked him if he believed me. "I believe you believe that you saw something." Slightly patronizing, but understandable. Besides, I thought having a skeptic on hand could be a good thing, so I started burning herbs on charcoal and calling in protection. We began in the living room. As soon as I called for protection, my friend jumped and gasped. Eyes popping out of his face, he took a few steps back and sat on the couch. He was very pale and had his ankles tightly crossed and his hands clasped firmly in his lap, elbows tucked in, sitting very straight, although he didn't know this. He had automatically assumed a pose recommended to close off your energy and aura. The poor guy looked horrified. He claimed that as soon as I called for protection, a bone-chilling blast of frigid air went straight through his entire body. I was standing right in front of him at the time, and he was amazed that I didn't feel anything. He was completely freaked out. I convinced him that finishing the cleansing was important after experiencing something like that, so he bravely got up and helped me cleanse my place. After we were through, I decided to let the herbs finish burning out in the shower. When I went to the shower, which we had just spent a lot of time in, smoking it out with herbs, there was a single fat black fly lying dead on its back, right in the corner the shadow liked to hang. We were both absolutely certain it wasn't there a few minutes before. While I realized flies get into houses, the timing and placement were freaky as hell. I've been here 7 or 8 years now, and that was the first, last, and only time I've ever found one of those big black corpse flies in my apartment. I haven't had any issues with shadows in my shower since. To this day, my friend gets noticeably freaked out when I bring up the cleansing, so I like to do it when we're drinking, and his expressions are even funnier than usual. But I don't think it was a shadow person or demon or anything like that. I think it was a ghost, without the energy to fully manifest, but who still liked to peep on 20-something females while they were showering. I never saw or felt it anywhere or any time else while it was in my place. Pervert. I also think it was most likely was that pasty guy who liked to mess with me at work, just eventually following me home. But who knows? He's long gone now, probably lurking in the corner of some other poor woman's shower. This story needs background to convey some factors that were potentially involved. I suspect the events leading up to the trip to Tennessee may have had a direct relation to the severity of the phenomenon we experienced while there. I had never wanted to marry, neither had my now husband. Then, we met each other. We were engaged at 30 and 28 years old and had a 2-year engagement. We wanted our wedding to symbolize our true soul bond and decided to go completely non-traditional. His giant family wanted a white dress Catholic wedding, so we were at major odds with the family from day one. My fiancée and I began suffering from a huge run of exponentially bad luck and some odd poltergeist activity at home. Nothing too major, so we brushed it off. Except when we left the house once and came back to find a red clown nose sitting front and center on our bathroom sink. No one had keys to our place, and we didn't own a damn clown nose. That one was freaky. When I told a friend something weird was going on, to the point I almost felt the wedding was cursed, he was trying to explain it away, and I said, "Watch, something's going to happen. Today while we're getting this tux, I'm telling you." I got one flabbergasted look before my fiancé immediately called to say there'd been a freak accident in the parking lot while he was getting fitted for his tux, and that someone had totaled the back end of his truck. That shut my friend right up. Another glitch was my refusal to have my father walk me down the aisle. I also refused a random stand-in for tradition's sake. I asked my younger brother, and he said he would be so honoured. We'd had some problems, but he'd been clean for 7 years and we'd made up our differences. Losing our middle brother to a drunk driver had driven us apart for a while, but brought us back closer a little later down the road. Then, 40 days before the wedding, my brother unintentionally committed suicide in his mid-20s. My fiancé and I drove for over 16 hours to say goodbye. I knew my brother, and I knew he wouldn't cross over easily with what he'd done, especially with my wedding around the corner and me counting on him. This really bothered me. His viewing was closed to immediate family only. He wasn't embalmed due to the complete autopsy required. He was covered in a handmade quilt to his chin. We were instructed not to touch him, although we ignored this stricture. After saying our goodbyes, I walked to the end of his gurney and laid my hands on his feet, a supplicant. I told him I understood it was an accident, and I forgave him. I told him that if he still felt he needed to make amends to me, then he could do so by calling forth my loved ones and those of my fiancé to come witness the wedding from the other side. I made and brung our other brother, my fiance's sister, grandparents, aunts, friends. I began calling my name all those beloved souls who had already passed. Do this, I told them, and there'll be no debt between us, and you can rest in peace. The looks on my family's faces were priceless at this point, but I felt this was something I needed to offer. I had a pendant made when I returned to New Orleans. On it was my favorite picture of my two brothers. I wrapped this around my bouquet, and although it seemed to the wedding guests that I walked the aisle alone, I knew that both my sweet brothers were right beside me in spirit, because they would never miss the wedding of their sister, especially with Hector, the suicide, actively dragging them across the veil to fulfill his last obligation to the living. My new husband, Eli, and I went to a rental cabin on Bluff Mountain for a honeymoon week. I don't want to name the specific cabin in case I'm not supposed to, but I will say it was very rocky with a raccoon theme. Bluff Mountain is in Pigeon Forge outside of Gatlinburg in the Smoky Mountains. I was living in New Orleans and had brought a double handful of fresh picked gardenia blossoms with me. It was a type of symbolic offering to the mountain for having us on such a special occasion. No rituals or anything. I simply arranged them on a wooden box with a fake bird and nest that was sitting on the top of the railing of the cabin porch, and sent up feelings of gratitude and joy. We went out to eat and grab groceries. Upon arriving back at the cabin, the wooden bird box was smashed into a million pieces on the porch. It hit the ground hard to shatter so far and so thoroughly. We thought maybe raccoon or bear. Then I noticed that there were no flowers. Maybe the wind. Leaves scattered all over the porch, just like when we left, made me hesitate. Gardenias aren't super light flowers, definitely heavier than the leaves I saw. More curious than anything, I looked all around the porch, stairs, and walkway. I shrugged it off until the next morning, when I went a little way down the driveway to pick some honeysuckle. About 20 feet from the porch, I glanced down and do a double take. There are my gardenias, all of them. They've been piled up and squished flat as crepe. There are no shoe prints, but it took more than one stomp to flatten the pile like that. Unnerved, I walk away, wondering if the mountain didn't like my offering after all, and then laughing at myself for the thought. Night 1. Eli wakes suddenly to what sounds like something big banging the support beams under the cabin. The cabin hangs off the side of a hill, so the front half is supported about 15 feet off the forest floor by giant wooden posts. They were being hit so hard that the mirror on the wall was vibrating, which frankly should be physically impossible for anyone to do. He says every time he started to drift back off, there was another bang. He gets up fully, and after one more cabin-shaking bang, he decides to wake me. Apparently, he was trying to see if I would wake from the banging so he would know he wasn't dreaming, but now he was 100% up. As he reached for me, he said the loudest bang or slap came from the area between the sitting area and kitchen, right at the bottom of the bed. It was a one-room cabin. He said it sounded like a giant book getting dropped from high up, but he was looking right there and there was nothing. The bang was definitely inside the cabin. He began frantically trying to wake me, but he said I was so deeply asleep, he actually thought something was wrong with me. He said he could barely tell I was breathing. Then, this strange metallic jangling sounded from behind the TV, directly across the cabin from our bed. He said it went on forever, but he was too scared to go look for whatever it was. Over there next to the huge windows, past the spot where the noise originated from inside. It was the insistent buzzing that finally woke me. I remember it was so hard to come back to consciousness. I felt like I was literally swimming through blackness to get back to myself. I kept asking, what is that noise? I thought it was an alarm someone left set. Shoot. When I finally woke up enough to move and sat up to go find and smash the offending noisemaker, the trilling stopped. Groaning. I fell backwards onto my pillow. Eli starts telling me about the banging. I could tell how upset my husband was. I believed that he was telling me, but I was so numb and out of it, I was struggling to come up with any emotional response at all. There was only this debilitating fatigue, and I fell asleep on my husband when he needed me. When a man whom I'd never seen afraid in 7 years was completely terrified, I just zonked out till morning. Normally, I'm an extremely light sleeper, especially in new places. This trip, however, almost every night was like this. No sooner did I put my head on the pillow than I was swallowed by blackness. It was an extremely deep sleep, but it wasn't restful. Waking up was worse. It was like falling into a coma every night and slowly reviving every morning. It ironically left me exhausted. Day and night too. While doing my makeup in the infamous shaking mirror the next morning, I was able to get the full story and talk to Eli about it logically. Maybe a bear was rubbing against the post. He says it was solid bangs like a huge fist. No way a bear. And what about the one from the center of the floor on the inside? That reminded me of that stupid alarm. I told him that I was about to disable that thing. At the exact frickin' second I mentioned it, that damn noise started blaring from behind the TV again. We both jumped like rabbits and laughed nervously. I don't know, wait time to time it, I joked. Funny. Looking behind the TV, I was surprised to see it wasn't an alarm clock, but a landline phone. An old one with a bell buzzer, which explained the horrid noise. Of course, I had to answer it. There was a minute of silence and then bursts of static. It really sounded like someone was talking, but static was obscuring their words. I told them to move to get better reception. Is this cabin management? The silence or garbled talk continued for a while before I hung up. I was amused, honestly, especially with the way Eli was gaping at me. When I hung up, he immediately unplugged the phone, said management had both our cells, so it was probably a prank call from someone who stayed here before. But we're not playing along and ending up in a deliverance scenario. Smart man. Phone stayed unplugged for the duration. That night, we were in the hot tub on the deck. It was around the back, had a gazebo-type cover around three sides, and no lights too close so bugs couldn't be swarming you. As we're relaxing, I'm sitting on the open end facing the enclosing wooden strips, and Eli's facing me in the forest. I kept admiring the blue light behind the enclosed end. It was large, about the size of a cantaloupe, and seemed bright, but the glow over us in the hot tub was very muted. I figured it must be LED of some sort, but I had never seen a light that shade of blue anywhere. All the other lights in and around the cabin were bright and orangey, so I remember saying how it was sweet that they went all out for mood lighting for the hot tub. Eli both looked at and commented on the lights as well. When we decided to get out for the night, the light blinked on and off in what looked like a purposeful sequence, before shining a few more seconds and going dark. We commented that it was strange how the light burnt out like that, and how we were sad to lose our mood lighting. I decided to call the next morning for a bulb. When I woke up, I first walked around the rear of the cabin to see what type of pole or other fixture was the one we needed serviced. There was no pole, fixture, or any other light source behind the hot tub. No cables, no wires. The main office later confirmed the instability of the soil back there prevented anything that wasn't heavy duty from being installed, so no lighting was ever put back there. Whatever that light was, we both saw it, and it was apparently just eavesdropping, because we were out there about 2 hours, and so was it. And if it wasn't turning off or burning out, that means it was straight up disappearing. Starting the second night after coming in, my skin started to crawl, and every hair on my body stood on end every time I passed the open bathroom. The bathroom was next to the bed area. Laying in bed, you could see the bathroom sink and the small window above it. The window had no curtains as it faced into the woods behind the hot tub. At this point, I still thought the blue light was man-made, yet I could swear there was something looking in the window. I've been leaving the bathroom door open because I liked looking out on the forest from the bed, but now I tried to keep it shut without Eli noticing I was being weird. Eli told me the next morning that every time he would start to drift off, a resounding bang on the posts under the cabin would jolt him up. He said he was freaked out because no matter how long or short a time he waited to lay his head down, it was like whatever it was knew exactly what he was doing, even though he never got out of bed. Once again, he was wide awake and terrified, and nothing he could do would rouse me even the slightest. Night 3. After scrubbing ourselves as best as we could in the highly stinky sulfuric water of the cabin, we were getting ready for bed. Walking from the bathroom to the bed, I realized I forgot to shut the bathroom door. Since Eli was already laying in bed looking at me, I just kept on toward my side of the bed, telling myself to stop being ridiculous, even though I could swear at that moment something was looking in that window. I had already looked out several times and couldn't see anything out of place. I could still feel it. Eli quietly asks me if I can shut that door. Why? Because that window gives me the creeps. Talk about validation. That night, I had some disturbing dreams, but I can't remember them. Eli, however, suffered a severe bout of sleep paralysis that night, although he swore it wasn't sleep paralysis because he says he sat up, kicked, and yelled at her. Now, however, he says it was probably sleep paralysis. Either way, he woke up to eerie laughter and saw what he described as a grudge-type woman standing at the end of the bed laughing at him. I wouldn't wake. He said she wore a white dress, had pale skin, black eyes, and a horrible mouth, long black hair partially obscuring her face, and was surrounded by a swirling black mist. She reached for him, and he sat up, yanking his legs up to his chest. This is when he started yelling at her to get the fuck out and kicking at her. Laughing, she faded out. He said he was woken by her grabbing his ankles and giggling throughout the night, and would also wake just long enough to catch glimpses of her. I was still no help. Night 4 repeats sleep paralysis experience for Eli, but he said even more intense. Same lady in white. I had also realised a trinket I brought for luck and put on the shelf next to my side of the bed was missing. It was a tiny cabin and we tore it up looking for the next 2 days, but I've never seen it again. It was worthless except for personal reasons, and no valuables were missing, so I don't think someone came in and snagged it. Night 5. Whenever I sat up out of the water on the side of the hot tub, I started to get the same feeling of being watched I'd felt from the bathroom window. I would literally break out in goosebumps. It was Friday, and we could hear a group of educated guess here, college kids partying hard some distance out, but close enough to hear their screams, whoops, and cheers. Not wanting to give an intrepid, wood-savvy creeper a show, we went in. Not much else happened on night 5 but troubled sleep. At one point, Ellie woke to frenzied banging on a support post, but it didn't last long or repeat. Night 6, final. This was an extra night we received due to the piercingly sulfuric water in the cabin. The filters needed to be replaced, and so they comped us a night. The water wasn't dangerous, just really, really stinky, like eau de la turd à la rotten egg. Bad. And although our nights were weird, we were on our honeymoon and just been through a tragedy. We spent our days having massive amounts of fun and doing so many awesome things, plus eating great food and drinking good wine with dinner. Gatlinburg is an amazing place to visit. So our last night in the hot tub, it's wonderful. Until I start feeling that intense regard from the tree line for the second night in a row. This time it's worse. I can actually feel the ill intent in this gaze. Whenever I came up to cool off, I literally find myself unconsciously wrapping my arms around myself and slipping slowly back down into the water. I remind my new husband how many years he's known me, and ask how many times he's known me to be scared or paranoid. I tell them there's absolutely something aggressive in the tree line looking at me, and it's not a college kid. We can hear them again tonight. He scoots over and I move to the covered end with him. Within 5 minutes of me moving, we hear a tremendous crashing from the brush behind us, and then something big stomping around directly below us. This is followed a few seconds later by more crashing and a second pair of footsteps stomping around. These sounded like human steps, but no one could make such a loud noise on the packed earth below the raised deck and cabin. We jumped up and looked at inside soaking wet. Eli says that night was the worst for the banging. He said there was banging on at least 3 widely separated posts, and it went on all night. He said when they did let him sleep, the woman would come. I slept like the dead, unresponsive to everything. Morning of day 7, leaving day. Something was demanding my attention, pulling me back toward consciousness. At first I thought it was the mounted police or one of the mule-pulled carriages that sometimes passed my place. No, this was definitely a whole plethora of horses. Was there a parade I didn't know about? Slowly, I remembered I wasn't in New Orleans, and although I was hearing sound like hooves, there was no paved roads anywhere near me at the moment, just a small gravel driveway out front. Quickly snapping awake, I realized the sound was coming from the roof. I checked my phone and it was a few minutes after 8 a.m. I groaned. Why the hell would nobody tell the roofers that the cabin was booked until 11 a.m.? I looked over at Eli. He was pale and breathing very slowly. I half-heartedly poked him a few times, but he was out. Ruefully, I thought of all he'd been dealing with while I slept as deeply as he seemed to be now, and left him alone. I'd been with him nearly a decade at this point, and he'd never spoken of things like this before. Whatever had been going on, he deserved sleep. At least it was Rufus in the sunny morning, and not weird shit at 4 a.m. At this point, it crossed my mind to wonder what Rufus worked on Sundays. I listened closer. It definitely sounded slightly metallic, but I decided my initial impression held. It sounded like a horse was kicking the shit out of the cabin roof. Well, what the hell do I know about roofing equipment anyway? I'd have to ask them to stop until we checked out. I pulled back the covers and swung my legs off the bed. The instant my feet touched the floor, the pounding on the roof stopped dead, and the handle to the main door, which was about 3 to 4 steps in front of me, started jiggling wildly. Two things. There was no pause between the noises. They went from on the roof, slightly towards the opposite side of the cabin, above where Eli was sleeping, to the doorknob in front of me without a time delay. Also, the top half of the door was glass with a sheer curtain, which the sun was shining directly through. I could plainly see that no one was near the door, yet I could also see the handle rattling wildly. I yanked my feet up and dove under the blankets, up to my chin like a child, I'm ashamed to say. As soon as my feet left the floor, the doorknob stopped rattling, and the incessant pounding on the roof resumed in the same spot, again with no pause between them during the switch. I'm now staring at Eli, wondering if I should wake him. I'm scared I won't be able to, but I'm also just as scared he'll wake up and won't hear it at all. His eyelids flutter open, taking the decision out of my hands. I ask him if he hears that, and thank all the gods that he says yes. I'm hesitant to talk about the door when he just opened his eyes, so we talk about what it sounds like first. He also immediately goes to Rufus. I ask if that sounds like a hammer to him. He says no, actually. We agree that it does sound like hooves or something slightly softer than metal. The whole time I realize we've automatically been whispering, and this pounding just keeps going on and on. Looking around the cabin, we see the mirror shaking, glasses in the kitchen area rattling, the cabinets quaking. Whatever is on the roof shook the walls of the cabin repeatedly. The pounding lasted about 35 minutes because I checked my phone right when I woke up, and right after it stopped, from 8:02 a.m. to 8:36 a.m., although I'm not sure how long it had been going on before it woke me. It was loud and strong, and absolutely terrifying. We lay there whispering for a long time. No way was this a person or people. We started thinking it, whatever it was trying to bust in through the roof, although the glass doors would surely have been easier to get through. When Eli said he was getting up to look, I told him about the doorknob shaking when I tried to get up. After a brief hesitation, he threw back his covers and sat up. The pounding stopped. He and I both froze. A terrible grating noise sliding on the roof broke the silence. We both looked at each other with big eyes and pale faces. Was that claws? I hissed in the quietest voice I could manage. He leapt back up onto the bed. The banging resumed. The quietest discussion ever followed about if we really had just heard claws up there. We thought it was exactly the sound huge claws would make. But really, it could still be anything. Eli grabbed his legally owned firearm from the bedside drawer before quickly standing. The pounding stopped for a second to allow for another grinding rasp to sound across the roof. That is definitely fucking claws, I said. The pounding immediately resumed, twice as fast and even harder, if that were possible. I could now feel the thumps reverberating through the bed. Ellie told me to stay inside and listen. Whatever it was, it sounded huge, and he needed me to let him know what direction I heard it moving if it ran out of his view up there. He burst out the door and aimed his gun at the roof. Pounding stopped. There was absolute silence. There was no sound of running anywhere on the roof, and the roof didn't have a damn thing on it. In addition, being perched on the side of the hill as the cabin was, with no trees close, there was nowhere anything up there could have gone. We packed at max speed. They did have one last smoke in the driveway to help with the shaking in the nerves. It was open, so it seemed relatively safe. While we were smoking, we could hear the people who had been partying the last few nights. They were all out yelling for a missing friend. We heard them yelling about the last time they saw him, which was apparently the night before. We could hear their panic as they screamed his name over and over. Eli and I tried to find the group to help look and ask if they'd seen or heard anything weird. However, the winding one-way dirt roads were confusing, and we ended up lost. We actually think they may have been locals, and we couldn't get to them because we were on rental cabin roads, which don't connect to local roads and driveways, for obvious reasons. I really hope they found him passed out drunk in a bush somewhere, and regret not being able to locate them and help them look. I have no idea what this was. Nearly every major paranormal MO showed up, from orbs, weird calls, and poltergeist activity to cryptid-type goings-on, and the lady in white. Yet it all really did seem like one thing in different outfits, if you will. After coming home, we had no more weird activity at the time. I did request for the departed to stand witness from a deceased brother who owed me a favour, but I specifically requested only the blessed dead, and only for the wedding ceremony. This didn't seem like protective ancestors to me though, so I don't think it was necessarily related. I actually lean towards more type of nature or elemental type guardian spirit personally, but that's just conjecture. Although he said differently at the time, Eli now thinks it was a Bigfoot, although I think not. Any ideas on what we may have encountered are welcome. I'd love to hear what everyone thinks. This all started around early October, when I had just moved to the house with my new puppy. It was early evening on a Friday, and due to my new job, environment and puppy, I was exhausted. I had crawled into bed and was laying down when I noticed my dog was in a particularly adorable position on the bed next to me. I pulled my phone to take a picture, but as I swung the phone back in front of me, I saw an old woman in a nightgown standing over our bed. It was only a split second, but she looked like a squat woman with salt and pepper hair and well-worn skin, and above all, she looked displeased. I chalked it up to hallucinations after a difficult and sleepless week, and quickly fell asleep. After all, I have a history of hallucinating when sleep deprived, but I've only ever hallucinated after an extended period awake, so this confused me. Later that night at about 3 a.m, my dog woke me to go to the bathroom. All was normal until I tried to get him to go back to bed. It's important to note that my dog's favourite spot in the house is the bed. It's where he runs if he's ever startled. I had forgotten all about my experience earlier in the night until I studied his face and saw fear. Nothing short of carrying him up the stairs could get him to follow me. The same thing happened again around 5 a.m. After that, it was a long time before I heard or saw anything, besides a pretty steady schedule of nightmares. But this is normal for me. Sometimes while waiting in the low-lit kitchen in the middle of the night for my dog to do his business, I would see figures shrouded in a shadow, walking between the dark spots of the living room, but I again assumed it was just late-night hallucinations. A few months later in December, after we'd both settled in more, one of my dog's other favourite places became a bed I'd got for him I placed behind the couch. I got used to the pitter-patter sound of his footsteps on the tile behind the couch, and even found sounds comforting. One night, I was doing schoolwork on my couch, and I noticed the pitter-patter sounded more like a scurrying back and forth. Confused, I swung my head to look behind the couch, but in doing so I saw my dog, napping several feet away, and I jumped up and startled both of us. Just as I jumped up, the scurrying stopped. I don't have any signs of rodents in the house, and have never heard or seen anything like that since. Later, in the early spring of February, I had my most undeniable and startling encounter. It was late afternoon, still 2 hours or so before dusk. Me and my dog attempted to do our usual walk around the neighbourhood, but when we left the house, he became very anxious, sat down, and started to whine. I wasn't sure what was wrong, but he clearly wanted to go back inside, so I obliged. As soon as he walked back inside, I heard two incredibly loud booms. It sounded sort of like door slamming. I was convinced someone was inside the house, but I wasn't sure what could be, considering we never left the front lawn. I threw open the door to the guest bedroom, where the sound originated from, and found nothing. I was so convinced someone was in the house, I dialed 911, but didn't end up calling. After waiting to hear for more noise when I heard nothing, I settled down. I ran down the list of what could have caused the sound, and nothing fit that I could think of. While working in the house, I've also heard a voice whisper, "Hey," to me. And this week, I found the frame of my favourite art print tilted to an almost 45-degree angle. As I said at the beginning, I don't particularly believe in ghosts or the paranormal, but my time in New Mexico is challenging my belief. If anybody thinks they can debunk some of this, I'm more than receptive. But what do you think? A bunch of weird stuff has been going on around our house, and we really need insight of what it could possibly be. 'Cause we're stumped. First of all, I'm a skeptic of the paranormal and look for reasoning above all else. Rewind to a couple of weeks ago, it started with random stuff flying off the kitchen counter. My boyfriend and I were always in the living room playing our games, while the kitchen is a couple of feet away, so we can hear pretty well if something happens in the kitchen. It's happened 2 times so far, and it's always the tortillas being thrown across the floor from the counter. Mind you, we eat out constantly, so no one is usually in the kitchen to have touched or moved at anything from the counters and made something prone to food. My boyfriend brushed it off then, and I did too. Fast forward to 3 days later. My boyfriend had a soccer game, so I was left alone at the house with my sleeping toddler. It's around 11 p.m., and I had the front door open because it felt nice outside, and I wanted a breeze while gaming. And I tell you I almost had a heart attack, because I know I heard someone run full force to the front door, so I swung my head immediately because someone was about to go in the shower. No one was there. My pit bull even stood up and ran to the door when it happened. So I knew I wasn't hearing things, and I immediately called my boyfriend, freaking out. Of course, he came home and I just looked crazy. A week after that, something else happened again. We have a glass house on the side of our house that has had a light. It's been out since high school, 7 years ago. My boyfriend has attempted to change the light bulb, assuming that's what it was, but it just never worked. He took out the trash, and lo and behold, the freaking glass house was lit up. I was inside when I heard my boyfriend cuss and call me outside. Sure enough, the light works now. Fast forward to Mother's Day Sunday, and another thing happened again. We had a cookout and had a bunch of people over. My boyfriend's mother had brought her boyfriend over, so for context, he's a tackman. So the Tacoma has like those 4 headlights. Sorry if I know, it's not. And 2 of them have been burned out since he first got the truck years ago. Well, sure enough, they all of a sudden start working when he takes off from our house. We didn't know the situation with his Tacoma until my boyfriend's mom called us to tell us what had happened, because we've been telling her something that's been going on in the house, but of course, no one believed us. And last night, again, something else happened, and scared the absolute shit out of my boyfriend and I. We share a bedroom with our toddler, and we have a baby monitor in the room to watch her while we game out in the living room. My boyfriend kept telling me he heard something in the room, but I brushed it off because my kid wakes up a good amount and makes noise. She kept waking up, sitting up, and kept staring at our window. After she went back to sleep, we went in there to lay down, and the white noise machine she had wasn't making any noise. I see that it's on, turned up all the way, but nothing is coming out of it. I unplug it and pop it up again, and it's working like normal. Okay, weird, but whatever. Happens, I guess. This freaks my boyfriend out, and he keeps telling me he knew I heard some weird noises in the room, and at this point I'm over it. I want to go to sleep. If you live in Oklahoma, you know last night there was a thunderstorm going off. My boyfriend and I woke up about 5 times to hear my daughter screaming in a crib next to us, but I kept telling my boyfriend that she's possibly teething, so to leave her. Thunder was going off, so it woke up a couple of times. And it even woke me up a couple of times. Until I woke up the 5th or 6th time, with something touching my feet. I immediately hopped up when I felt it. Couldn't see anything, and I chalked it up to me being half asleep. Maybe a bug or just waking up with thunder, and I'm probably just imagining things. I tell my boyfriend about it in the morning, and he's mad that I didn't wake him, because he keeps saying last night was off with our daughter screaming. The sound machine and the noises he was hearing. At this point, I'm confused and worried. Confused? Because what if all these things are just coincidental, and it's nothing paranormal like I've started to think? What the hell is it? I'm also worried because I don't want anything hurting my daughter, anything happening to her. My boyfriend wants to put something blessed in our house. I'm not religious at all, to see if it helps. I don't know what to do. One night, I heard muffled footsteps and a light switch go off. And another time, when I was home alone, I could smell a flowery perfume. Most nights, I'll be lying in bed under my covers at a moderately hot temperature. Then it seems really fast. It goes to the point where I'm unbearably hot and sweating, and it'll just kind of stop. I also wake up between 3 or 4 a.m. almost every night. And lately, I've been hearing faint whispering that I can't make out, almost as if it was blending into the ambient sounds around me. I've also had weird experiences as a kid, which I mentioned in my other post, where I said that my mum told me that I was a kid she would come to in my room to find me talking to what appeared to be nothing. But when she asked me about it, I'd say I'm talking to the old women. Another time I was home alone with my brother, and only I heard the pots and pans clattering and smashing in the kitchen. So my brother went to check, and nothing was there. Ever since watching these films, Insidious and The Conjuring 1 and 2, I've been having these weird experiences. But since my last post, a lot of people just said a film can't open up to a haunting. So I shrugged it off and thought it's just in my head, and me being paranoid after watching the films. This morning, I had an unsettling dream where me and my dad were in our car, and he looked at the house and looked back, and he has the face of a decaying old woman. I then woke up to the feeling this pressure on top of me, but nothing was there, and it just suddenly stopped. I then felt like I was being watched and realized my phone was on. I reached over to grab my phone, and it has the calculator app pulled up and had a really long number typed into it. I then started smelling a really weird smoky smell that disappeared after a few seconds. What really worried me, I don't possibly know how that could have happened, and the pressure on my chest, and the smell. I don't know what to make of it all, I really don't. I haven't had any experiences like this since I was a kid, and they all stopped for so many years until I watched a few haunted house films, and it all starts back up. It's really weird. So last night I had a dream that came in two parts. However, it's the first part that was relevant to what happened today. In that first part of the dream, I was in my car when a silver pickup started ramming into it. I screamed and yelled for the driver to stop, and then I saw that the driver was a man with no face. He ignored my pleas and continued ramming my car. Somehow, I was able to escape my car, but when I stepped out, the man in his pickup disappeared. I told my parents and my dad, relayed what I said to a friend back in Indonesia, who has a sixth sense and specializes in this kind of stuff. Flash forward to evening when I was helping close to the TJ Maxx I work at. My manager and co-workers were having a huddle today when my manager said she thought she saw someone walking around the back of the store. Thinking nothing of it, I volunteered to investigate and make sure there was no more customers lingering. Checked the restrooms, the janitorial closet, but it was when I checked our back room where we stored items that would be put in the sales floor later on. The moment I stepped into the back room, I got goosebumps and felt dizzy. I felt like there was something coiled around my head. As I walked closer to the electrical room that had the power switches to our store, the feeling got worse and worse. Of course, I was afraid and refused to push my luck, so I left and reported to my manager there was nobody there. We continued on the process of closing the store, but the feeling of being watched lingered. When I got home, I told my parents and my dad messaged his friend. What we were told was the first part of my dream was a warning for today's events. Whoever my manager saw was in a bad mood. Later on, when I was cleaning up one of my dogs, I was overcome with sadness out of nowhere. Tears welled up in my eyes. I don't know why I started crying and I became afraid that I was followed home. It was crazy because a few weeks ago, a different manager during the closing shift thought she saw someone walking around the back of the store, but we didn't investigate. Anybody got any advice on what I should do? I've encountered spirits before, but never have I ever encountered a bad spirit like my sister did. The last one is a story for another day. Some years ago, we had some odd things happen in the bathroom that we have in the basement. There were other odd things that have happened over the years in other places in the house, but the stories I feel like sharing took place in the downstairs bathroom. A particular event happened during a power outage. I brought down an electrical lantern and set it down in the bathroom while I took a shower. I made the mistake of not bothering to take out my earrings for some studs, figuring it would be fine. While I'm in there, the light suddenly turns off and one of my earrings pops out with quite a bit of force and falls. The light came back on about 5 seconds later. I'm unable to find the earring, and I assume that it went down the drain. Several days later, my dad finds the earring sitting on the sink. That shouldn't be possible. When taking a shower in that room, occasionally I'd hear somebody knock on the door and I'd have to ask multiple times what they wanted. I would assume it was one of my parents. But it turned out, nobody was there. Then one day, I was taking a shower and I felt a hand touch my shoulder. I thought maybe I touched the soap holder and it wasn't really a hand at all, so I tried to prove myself that's what I actually felt. I leaned back until I touched it, but I had to lean so far back I almost fell. I was weirded out by that, but it didn't take long to get over it, and I figured I must have imagined it or something. When I got out of the shower though and was drying off, I heard the sound of scratching at the door. Like as if somebody took one finger and slowly scratched the door several times, one after another, at about chest level. I got pretty nervous and asked who was out there, and there was no answer. I resumed drying off, really nervous while doing so and trying to hurry up. Before I could finish though, the clock CD player combo thing we had in there turned on by itself. It started playing the CD I'd left in there, and it started playing in the middle of a song. I'm not sure if it's supposed to be able to start in the middle of a song. It's nothing I'd remembered being able to do with it before, but maybe I just didn't fully know how it worked. The song was Up Through the Ashes by Camelot, starting with Raise Me up through the ashes, take me on into the light. I kind of froze in place for a moment. Then I rushed over and turned it off, and got out of there as quickly as I could. That was the last weird experience I had down there. Nothing weird has happened down there in the years since. I should note that the Camelot CD that was playing was ghost opera. I think it's kind of appropriate. It makes me laugh a bit in retrospect. So I have two really solid ghost experiences in my life so far, and a third that could have been my imagination as a child. I hope that my stories don't come off as bullshit, but here we go. Sometime in 2011, my parents and I travelled to my mom's hometown to celebrate her 40th grad reunion. My grandfather passed away a few years back in 2008 when I was 9, so I didn't really get to know him. It was a fun trip as the town was a really nice place with a German-styled plaza. As of right now, my memories of what I was doing exactly are fuzzy, because it's nearly 10 years since it happened, but I know that I was walking alone through the plaza to find my dad at one of the small shops. While I was walking, things suddenly went quiet. It was weird to me, because although the town was small, it was about midday and the plaza was bustling for its size. It felt like I transitioned into a void because there was darkness all around me. I remember looking through the haze of this void, not sure what was happening, when I heard a voice ask how I was doing. After that, as quickly as the void had appeared, it stopped and I was returned to the real world. I remember I wasn't afraid of what had happened, just confused. I believe my grandfather had taken the time and energy to communicate with me. Is the sensation of being in a void without sound common when a loved one's spirit talks to you? Overall, I'm glad this experience happened. It let me know that, even though we didn't get much time, my grandfather still watches over me. My second experience is much more recent, coming in just last year, but also a bit more frightening. I had been asleep in my bed downstairs. I think I was on a streak of getting an alright sleep at night. Sometimes I swap between horrible sleeps and easy sleeps. Anyway, I'm not quite sure what time it was, maybe after midnight, but I woke up to the sound of someone entering my room. I wasn't sure who it was, but I could feel a presence staring at me and see a hand. I was lucky that I had fallen asleep facing the door with my blanket partially covering my face, because when I realized someone was there, it made me feel like they'd have a harder time noticing I was awake. My dad was the first thought to come to my head. I still live at home, and he struggles with inner demons. I was worried at first that he was watching me sleep and planning on doing something horrible to himself. When I started thinking like this, my breathing became harder to control. At that point, I thought I was going to hear, "I know you're awake," but nothing was ever said. After a few minutes, I gathered my courage to turn on my bedside lamp. Nothing. I didn't know whether to be relieved that it wasn't anyone, or freaked the hell out that I clearly saw a goddamn hand and felt a presence in my room. I remember grabbing my Swiss Army knife, gift from a friend, to look around my house. But it was dark, all the doors were locked, and I found nothing. My third encounter was when I was a small child, around 5 or 6, so I don't know if it was real or not. It was early in the morning, and I was just waking up from sleeping in my parents' bed. I remember looking over the side of my bed my mom slept on and saw a shadow figure with two eyes holes leaning over the bed. My reaction was to hide my head and close my eyes, and whatever it was never bothered me again, thank goodness.